I am Matthew Jenkins Yarashevitz, Music Director Designate of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
And I'm Rachel Hagemeyer, President and CEO.
This is Orchestrating Change. Our guest today is horn player and composer Jeff Scott. He rose to prominence as the founding horn player and 20-plus year member of the Imani Winds, a nationally renowned woodwind quintet made up of musicians of color. His horn career has also taken him to the pit of the Lion King on Broadway and the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, as well as on tour alongside such luminaries as Barbara Streisand. Jeff is also a prolific composer whose new piece, Song of the Uirapuru, I had the pleasure of premiering here in Canton with violin soloist Seohyun Kim. A native of New York City and a graduate of Manhattan School of Music and the State University of New York at Stony Brook, he now lives here in Northeast Ohio, where he is a professor at Oberlin College. Jeff Scott, welcome to Orchestrating Change.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Rachel, for having me.
Yeah, so we're so happy to have you here today. So just to get us started, Matthew always does the best introductions, but if you could just give us a little bit of your own introduction and how you got into this world of music. I know we'll talk about more specific things later, but maybe little Jeff and how little Jeff first got introduced to the music as a child.
Oh, bless your heart. Little Jeff, man, that's a long minute ago. But I'll tell you this, I'll tell you exactly what I told the search committee when I interviewed for this job right here at Oberlin. The first thing I said to them was, I actually didn't want to be a musician. I wanted to be a baseball player. I wanted to play for the New York Yankees. And music was like third. The second thing is I wanted to be a cartoonist. I wanted to do Marvel. I used to draw like superheroes and stuff like that when I was a kid. And I'd make little small cartoons like in the second and third grade, and I'd pass them around in class and get in trouble because they'd laugh. I'd put the teacher in compromising situations. That's getting beat up. And music came a really distant third. And I told, as late as actually when I auditioned for college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to, whatever I did, I wanted to do it at a really high level. And I only knew New York schools. We weren't savvy, my family, in the ways of going and visiting colleges and other states. So I said, Mom, I'm going to audition for like Juilliard, Manhattan School, and Manus. I'm going to do bring my portfolio to Pratt University and School of Art and Design. And I said, I'm going to do a tryout for baseball for St. John's. And I said, whoever gives the most scholarship money, that's what I'm going to do.
Oh my gosh!
So I landed at Manhattan School of Music, and really the rest is history because I got into Juilliard, but they didn't give me a dime. They said you can come if you want, but we don't give you no money. But I got scholarship to go to Manhattan School of Music. Wow. So that's right.
Oh, cool.
Wow, that's incredible. You even till the very end of high school, you were still juggling all three of those interests.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but our late music director, Gerhard Zimmerman, he is from Ohio, and he always had a dream to play second base for the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, and so you said that, and immediately I thought about Gerhard. So you share something deeply in common with Gerhard, is the original dream was to be a baseball player.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
So what was your time like at Manhattan School of Music and at SUNY Stony Brook?
Very different experiences. Manhattan School of Music was a pure conservatory, and it was a little different for me coming out of high school. I'd done youth symphony and stuff like that, and so I knew what it was like to be around folks that were like-minded in terms of wanting to, pursue their instrument. But just the whole idea of music and only music, like I said, I had other interests, and so it's just kind of like, wow, it's music all day long. Like, really? Okay, so that was a tough adjustment, but fortunately I was still relatively close to home. My mom and I lived in Queens, so I was still commuting and everything, and that was fine. I also, I had this weird sort of idea of what studying music was going to be about. I remember it was probably my second or my third week of lessons. My great teacher, who's still doing it, David Jolly, he said, "So, young Jeff, what do you want to do with this life in music, And I remember very specifically saying to him, well, I think I'll study for about a year or so. I'll start taking auditions, and then I'll win a job. And he didn't laugh out loud. You guys are both hiding your faces. He didn't laugh out loud. He just went. Meanwhile, I couldn't play the scale. I'm doing the play, And he just was, okay, well, yeah. So I didn't know. I was just real young, and I didn't understand things. So I finished those 4 years. And when I went to Stony Brook, Stony Brook was a kind of it was a real campus, and I had other interests that I was able to pursue. One of them was actually getting more into, it wasn't necessarily getting more into, I shouldn't say that, but just the idea of getting into composition. You could take electives there, and I decided to take an elective in arranging. And one of the composition professors there, a man by the name of Jack Lassard, gave a class in orchestration. And what we did was we took like Beethoven piano sonatas, Chopin, and we would orchestrate them out for different types of orchestras. So a Mozart-sized orchestra or a romantic orchestra. And sometimes we do the reverse. We take a early Mozart symphony and condense it down to piano, which really, I didn't know what I was doing, but what I was learning at the time was everything that you needed, the palette, that you needed to start thinking about actually composing, understanding the instruments, how they work, the ranges, the timbres, and so that actually was kind of the beginnings, very early beginnings of me getting into composition.
So, after school, I guess you'll have to take us a little bit on the journey of your career path here, because there's been a lot, as mentioned in the intro here. So I'd like to talk about Imani Winds for a second. I told you this when you were here in Canton, but I was obsessed with woodwind quintets when I was a young bassoonist, and so I forced my friends to play Umoja with me, which is an Imani Winds piece, and but it was so attainable for high schoolers. And so I'm curious as to how did the Imani Winds come about? How did this group get founded? What was kind of the catalyst that made this kind of iconic now group begin in the first place?
Oh, thank you for asking. And the way it happened was it's very simple. Valerie Coleman, the flutist and founder of the group, was the driving force, and she continues to be a force of nature in bringing recognition to African Americans in classical music. She had the idea and the name of the group before she even had the musicians. She knew what she wanted to do. She just had to find the people and plug in the pieces. She wanted to shine a light on the music she was composing. She wanted to also highlight composers of color, and she wanted to show that African Americans and Latinos can play classical music on a high level. And so I got this call one day. I was actually the second horn player in Imani Winds. The very first horn player was a fellow by the name of Marshall Seeley, who's still doing his thing in New York and Boston. But he was much older than them by probably 20 years. And he was the only African American horn player that at that point Valerie knew. And he got into the band and they started rehearsing. He realized very soon that it wasn't going to be a gig band. He thought it was just going to be like, we do some lobby gigs and maybe a Christmas gig, and they wanted to rehearse 3 times a week and do recitals and competitions. And he's like, no, this is not my bag. And as far as at that point, there was not a serious wind quintet that was doing it on a everyday basis. And so he recommended me, and I get this call one day from folks I don't even know, and they said, "Hey, you come recommended from Marshall Seeley. We have this wind quintet." So I go, I get a couple of rehearsals into the thing, and it's fun, and they're great people and everything. Valerie comes in one day with this like calendar and grid of how she sees our careers, progressing. Now, first of all, at this point, I was in my first year of Lion King, earning a real dollar on Broadway. And here comes this woman telling me that, this group that I'm playing is wind quintet, that I had never heard of a wind quintet that actually had a career touring, was going to like get Grammys. And I mean, she projected everything that happens to the group. She projected in that first couple of weeks that I was there. And I have this memory and this conversation with my best friend in the world, Greg Smith, who's now actually playing in my spot at the Lion King, Horn French Horn. We laugh about this because we were in the car going to a gig one day. I said, "Man," he said, "how's that quintet going?" I was like, "Well, they're kind of cute." But the flute player is crazy. He thinks that this thing is going to be like a career. She's like, "You came in today with a whole plan of how we're going to tour and make recordings and win a Grammy." And we laugh about that to this day because I mocked her. I had no idea how I was this silly talk. And it was all Valerie's vision. And one by one, the members of the original group that are sitting right over my shoulder here, they all hopped on board. We had to give up stuff. I had to quit Lion King to become part of Imani Winds permanently because we were touring so much, and it was a huge decision to leave a full-time, gig, and Lion King's still, still doing his thing, and people making over $100,000 plus, making their lives, and I had to make that leap of faith into money.
So another big chapter of your life, you were a member of the ensemble at the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. And for those who don't know, it is an African-American dance company and school based in New York City. Can you talk about what it was like to be a part of this iconic African-American arts organization?
You got another hour?
I feel like, Alvin Ailey is such an interesting story just as Alvin Ailey. But that school, I know you could talk for a long time, but maybe if you could give us a sneak peek.
Yeah, I mean, you could go on and on. I personally was just very fortunate. The two main African-American based dance troupes, Harlem Dance Theater and Alvin Ailey, in those days, and I'm talking about the 90s, had full seasons in New York City where they would do maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks directly of ballets and so on. And I did a doctoral program. I didn't finish, but I did a doctoral program through City University of New York. And most of my work was at Oberlin College, where Tanya Leone, the great Tanya Leone, was actually the conductor at Oberlin College. And I was her TA. And I also played in the orchestra, and she knew I could play. And she was conducting in really both of the ballets, and they wanted to make the orchestra younger, and they wanted to bring more African Americans into the orchestra. So she came to me one day and she said, I may have something for you, Jeff." I said, "What?" And she put me on fourth horn in first in the Harlem Theater, and then I kept my nose clean. I did a good job, showed up on time, and next thing I know, I found myself playing in the Alvin Ailey. Same thing in the low horn section, because it was a very established ensemble with people that have been playing in this thing for many, many years. And I'll never forget that the first time I was on the stage, not on the stage, but in the pit, and I was able to look out on the stage and watch them sort of warming up and getting ready for the rehearsal and everything. And everything that I saw around me kind of looked like me, and it was great. You know what I mean? It was at its highest possible level that art could be at. And I realized literally at that moment, and I promise you this is the truth, I started to cry because I'd never been a part of such a grandiose thing where everyone looked like me. It's like blew my mind. And, you know, I have to admit, I was in like a little bit of a shock for about an hour of that rehearsal. I don't even remember what happened. I think I played the notes that were in front of me, but that sort of thing just wasn't, I just wasn't used to it, you know? And you know, it really goes back to sort of what Valerie was trying to do for chamber music, you know? So, you know, when you see greatness and you know it's possible, you reach for greatness yourself, you know? And I'm absolutely sure that the reason why she put the ensemble together is because she had probably witnessed something like that in her life, you know, and wanted to recreate it on another level.
So I have a question, just backing up a little bit. When you were in school, what percentage of the student body at Manhattan School of Music were students of color?
I don't know the percentage because I can't remember exactly how many students were there, but there were 6 of us.
Okay.
That I remember because and 2 or 3 of them are members of the Marian Anderson String Quartet. We all went to school together, and I remember 2 others were singers. I'm forgetting their names now, but I showed up my first year of school. I went down to the cafeteria in the lower area, and they were all sitting at a table, and they saw me. Like, come here. And he's like, "We're the only black people in this school." Hi, my name is. But yeah, that was it. I don't know what the percentage is. 2.
Yeah.
Is there something? I'm sure the answer is yes, because you just talked about the experience with Alvin Ailey and seeing it and crying for the first time. But is it easier to make music? Is it more fulfilling to make music when you're in a room surrounded by people that look like you, as opposed to being 6 of hundreds in a room? Does it affect the way that you make your music?
Well, it's kind of 2-pronged because you said, is it easier?
Mm.
It depends. It depends on, you know, it depends on what shoulder you feel you're standing on. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you've never, like I said, if you've never experienced greatness that looks like you, and you're in something where no one looks like you, you might feel like you're on a deserted island, you know, and that you have to prove something. But when you know there's been greatness, you know who you are, and you know from what you come from, and you stand firm. So it depends on where you know, how you got introduced to that. The feeling, though, is, you know, it's one of those things that making music, I wouldn't say that it changes the way you make music, but there's just something that I can't really put my finger on it, in all honesty. And I did 24 years in Imani Winds, but there's just some things we just never talked about, and I can't really put my finger on it. And it's not like, oh, because you're black. No, there's like there's an experience, a common experience that has something to do with being African American, but also having to do with the type of upbringing that you have, this sort of the way socially you interact in the world. Yeah, it's informed by, you know, my ancestors, but it's something else, and I can't really, you know, it's like if you do something with a brother or sister, you know, and you can just sort of look at each other and you already know what the other one is saying. Yeah. That's not necessarily because you're both white or black, but it's because of the experiences you had that you draw upon, and you don't even have to talk about it. It's just there, you know?
Yeah.
And making music in that type of scenario is a special thing, because some things you just never even have to discuss. It just happens.
Wow.
Wow. Really quickly, before we move on from Alvin Ailey, what was the first ballet you ever played in the pit at Alvin Ailey?
Revelations. Come on, man. The classic, I mean, it's one of those things where you wait for those times in the score where you've got about 10, 20 bars of rest and you can stand up and watch.
Yeah.
It's just because you want to see this greatness, and that I have to say was and continues to be, I mean, it's such a classic now that it's almost cliche, but it's pure beauty.
Now, we've already alluded to this a little bit, but you played in one of the most iconic Broadway shows of our time, The Lion King. And let me say, I came with my family as an 8-year-old to New York City in sometime, I want to say it was the winter of 1998, like January, February, March 1998. I most likely saw
Did you hear Jeff?
I most likely did as an 8-year-old boy who just was utterly blown away. We were sitting in the third to last row of the highest balcony because that's what my family could afford. But it was the first time my parents ever took the whole family to New York, and we loved it. So tell us, what was it like to play in The Lion King?
Wow.
99% sure you saw me. It was on a Sunday?
I want to say it was a Saturday matinee.
Saturday matinee, for sure. Any Saturday, we did all the regulars always did the weekend shows because they paid more to do the weekend shows, especially the Sundays. But the double shows, we always did the days where we had 2 shows because it paid more. So that it was like maybe once in a blue moon I would not be in on a Saturday or Sunday. So the Lion King, I have to say, it remains one of those things that still gets me. I don't necessarily like Broadway shows. In all honesty, I think sometimes they're just made for kitschy entertainment, which serves its own purpose. But in terms of me paying $150 to see it, I don't need to pay $150 to go do. The music and the choreography and it's just it changed the game really on Broadway, and the experience every time. And I've had family come to see it. I've personally seen it probably 4 times because I would bring either family. I brought my son, and it's just one of those things. Each time I'm like, I found myself like almost crying. I'm like, I'm not crying. I'm not crying. It's a perfect thing. It's literally they figured it out. They really figured it out.
I remember the first time I saw Lion King on a tour in Oklahoma City. It came to the Civic Center in Oklahoma City, and I don't know if they do this on Broadway. I'm assuming they do, but the opening sequence, Circle of Life, everyone comes in on the aisles. Did that happen in the show? Yeah. Okay, that happens all the time. When that happened for the first time, I lost my mind. I lost it. And I was crying as a child, and I didn't know why, because it's insane. It's just crazy. This show with the puppets and their intricacy and the way that they move with the people, and the music is just so impactful. And everyone who's ever been in the production has a voice of a god. Like, it's just, oh my gosh.
100%. And my boy, you all met.
Yeah.
When we brought him, he was just 5.5, I think, or 6. And the same thing. We had a lower orchestra seat, and so he the stuff came from behind, and I didn't say anything because I knew what was going to happen. And he heard this music, and then he heard the rumbling behind him, and he turned around, and that was it. We lost him for about 10 minutes. Oh my God! Just went bonkers, It's special.
For me, I mean, I don't think I saw The Lion King in theaters. I was maybe just like 6 months too young. I saw Toy Story, the original Toy Story. That, I think, was the first thing I ever saw in a theater, which was around the same time. But obviously, I grew up watching Lion King on video cassette. And the moment I saw the sun rise from the stage, just like in the movie, I couldn't believe it. I was so blown away.
It's a technical feat. That
It
whole
is.
show is a technical feat. It's crazy.
So here's a fun question though. You were in the pit, but when did you first see the show? Did you see it on, like, did you take a day off so that you could see it, or did you not see it until you took your kid?
Well, the producers at the show in the beginning were very cool with us in that regard. They allowed us to take a night off and watch the show and still pay us within a certain time frame. So we could actually get a sub. That was like in the first year or something like that, because it was such a great hoopla around it, and we never really got to see it. So I took a night off sometime in the first year, and I went and I watched it and just was, just blown away. I mean, it's just, and from that point on, and we actually had access. We didn't get free tickets, but we had access to orchestra seats, which had been sold out for it was sold out for 2 years down the road. But they kept a block for each concert, each show that we could purchase up to 3 or 4. Each person could purchase, and my inbox and my email was filled all the time. Friends of a friend of a friend of a friend. Hey, I heard you could get tickets, and I was like a little bookie, I was just buying tickets all the time. It was such a hot show at that. They still, you can still have to struggle a little bit to get a ticket, but it's not 2 years out anymore.
Right. Wow, I didn't know they had email back when the show first came out.
I had my very first computer in 1992, so we were still dealing with, the early emails.
Yeah, we had one in our house around the same time, and it had a blue screen with white letters on it. It was not full color.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I first got introduced to you because of Imani Winds. I first knew you that way. But we here in Canton have got to know you firstly as a composer, as we just did a world premiere of one of your pieces here in Canton. And I will tell you, Jeff, in the post-concert survey, people get to pick their favorite piece of the concert. And I would say it's mostly your piece and then Shostakovich. So people loved your piece. And so I just want to talk a little bit about your journey to do composition. You also do arranging as well. You mentioned a little bit with your time at Stony Brook. But what has been your journey into the world of composition and doing more, actually, really doing a lot more composition than you did for 24 years in Imani Winds and, all of that?
Well, it definitely did start with learning how to arrange and orchestrate, really, I should say, with Jack Lassari. When I got out of school, I was doing a lot of commercial work, like the Barbara Streisand stuff, and I was also playing in this jazz and funk brass band that was called, with this name, No Nanette. It was a Nanette.
That's amazing.
So, play on the name of the play, and everyone in the band had to write their own charts and score out their own charts because we didn't have traditional rhythm section. We didn't have piano and double bass, and so all the chords and everything had to be written out. And my two dear friends in that band, Rob Sussman and Glenn Makos, they were bringing in charts all the time, and they had studied, like I did, in conservatory and everything. And I was listening to what they were doing and how they scored things and made crescendos sound really good. And, also learning how to write for drums because I didn't know how to write for drums and all that stuff. I was checking it out. And I would write. I brought in my first few charts, which were absolutely horrible. Just the worst example of composition. And since it was a jazz band, they just improvised and made it sound better. Just do something there. Don't play what I wrote. I got into Imani Winds, and that's where I went to school. In two ways, I just watched what Valerie was doing and how she made the instruments sing in all the different unorthodox ways, not using the instruments in their traditional fashion, making colors that I'd never heard. But also because that was the best lab band that anyone could ever dream of. I could bring in 20 bars of an idea and have them tell me, okay, this works, that doesn't work. I always say, if it sounds bad when Imani Winds is playing it, you probably wrote bad music. It's just as simple as that. So I went to school really there, and also benefited from the fact that we were touring a lot of the stuff that I was arranging and then eventually composing, and getting people hearing my music on a large scale. We do 150 days a year out on the road, and people are hearing your music, and eventually somebody's going to say, "Hey, can I commission you?" So that's really how it started. The journey started with exposure from Imani Winds, and then honing the skill really came. I guess I probably wrote my very first big commission was in 2008. It was a double wind quintet piece for the University of Utah, and it went really well. It was a really successful piece that people still play a lot of these days. And I had specifically wanted to write for winds because I knew wind quintet, and so I knew I could really make a good showing with that. But then slowly, I started branching out into the other instruments as I just studied more. I'm a student, and I will remain a student. And so that's really how I truly started getting into writing for orchestras, just learning from the greats.
Definitely. So before we leave the topic of this your composition world, tell our listeners, we already know the story, but tell our listeners the story of Song of the Uirapuru, because this is such a special piece with a special story, and I really want our listeners to hear about it.
That's really okay. Well, the title is Song of the Uirapuru. And I say it that way because I can speak Portuguese, and my wife is from Brazil, and the basic story of the piece is that a bird realizes at some point that it's not very comfortable in the habitat that it's in. They don't know exactly, doesn't know exactly why, but it just doesn't feel right. And someone tells the bird, and someone that actually you're not from the United States, you're from this wonderful place called the Amazon. And later in the piece, there's sort of a lament section where it longs to go back to where it's originally from, and eventually makes it to the Amazon. And it's this incredibly wild and mystical place, and sees folks that looks just like them, and they enjoy each other and everything. But then some point, and this is towards the very end of the piece, and realizes, well, this is all wonderful, but I actually like my life back in the States. Now, that might not be the reaction that most birds from the Amazon would have, but since the story is actually about my wife, that's really what has happened in our lives. My wife immigrated to the United States to be with me many years ago, and for a while, because of immigration and how difficult it really is to get permanent status here, legal status, she wasn't able to go back for years. And our son was growing and growing and growing, and he hadn't seen his grandma and everything. And so finally, this year, they were able to go back after 5 years. We couldn't get back, and so we all spent a month in Sao Paulo with their family, and I got to see my wife in her place, and it's incredible because it's family, and so they do this, and then it's crazy, and it's funny, and it's and they're screaming at each other, and it's just beautiful. It's delicious, And my son, I have to say, he grew up here. Like, he's probably been here, I mean, he was 7, so he spent maybe a year in Brazil, He doesn't know anything about Brazil, but you would know it. It was as if he became himself. Like, you had to see it. It was just unbelievable. In any case, But about a month in, they were both like, "So when we going home?" This is all great. I want to go back home. And I said to your audience, thank goodness my wife decided to come back with me, and she always comes back with me, whenever we travel. She loves her life here in the States. And so I wrote this piece really to talk about, the relationship of myself and my wife, who is originally from a great place in Brazil.
A wonderful story and a wonderful, wonderful piece that truly it was an honor to premiere. And I'm not going to forget it. There will be a second performance at some point.
Yeah, and your wife is pretty awesome too. She's pretty cool.
Pretty awesome.
Oh my goodness.
So this brings us now to today. You are now a professor at Oberlin College. So tell us a little bit, what is it like working in academia today? And what do you think are some of the challenges facing higher education and specifically conservatories?
It's Oberlin, so pinch me, and you can never know that you're going to end up in a place like this. Job openings happen rarely, and traditionally, in a big name conservatory like this, people who teach the applied brass or applied woodwinds are folks that play in major symphony orchestras, and that was the case with my predecessor, Mr. Roland Pandolfi. And so when I was shortlisted and asked to send my CV in, I have to admit, and I've told everyone this, that I thought it was just, they were filling the quota of, African American potential hires, and I honestly, the way I was contacted, I was playing, of all things, a Mozart Grand Partita in Portland, and the clarinet professor here was playing basset horn, and he was on the search committee. I didn't know he was on the search committee here, and every time I was playing fourth horn. I was playing like low note, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, and every time I played though, he'd turn around and go, "Nice notes, nice notes." And next thing I know, he had a break. He asked me for my number. Then he sent an email. He says, "Hey, we're doing this search," and blah, 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 blah. And I totally disregarded it. God's honest truth. And about a month later, he called me again, and he said, I just wanted to know if you had any interest in sending in your CV. We're really, at the ends of the search, and we'd love to have your CV in. And I told my wife, and she was like, "Well, try it. You never know." I was in my 24th year with Imani Winds, and 2 or 3 years prior, I had told the group that I probably have 5 more years of touring left in me. I'd already turned 50, and I'm with the kid and my wife, and being on the road that much all the time was just really difficult. So, and I was teaching part-time at Montclair State University, New Jersey, and I had gigs. I figured I'd just change my life, So I didn't know this was going to happen. And of course I came here and I did my thing and got lucky and I got the gig. I explained what my interview was like. I told them my interests were music third. And I think that's part of the reason why they enjoyed my interview, because the majority of the student body here are double majors. I've got 20 French horns in studio, and I think 7 are actual French horn majors. The rest are double major in something else. And they all play incredibly, but they're going to change the world in very various ways. They're not going to all end up in Cleveland Orchestra, and that's not to say there's anything wrong or strange about that, but that's just the makeup of this place. I think they wanted a professor that sort of could come with all the different experiences. Now, in academia, especially in conservatories, traditionally that's not the case. You don't usually have professors that have varied experiences. They usually have done one thing. They've either taught their whole lives, or they played in the orchestra for 25, 30 years, or they played in a string quartet for most of their lives. And so they come with that experience, and that's usually why they get hired. And so when we start discussing things like, curriculum, changes in curriculum, repertoire in the orchestra, what we're going to do in chamber music. Well, things can get difficult, complicated. And you cannot, and I've said this, and I've been, on a dozen at minimum conversations about the future of music and inclusion and and change. I've done that a gazillion times. But I always say you cannot fight against something that is proven effective. You've got professors who have a lineage of successful students after graduating, getting great jobs in great orchestras. You can't tell them that what they have done doesn't work, because it does work. So that's not. But the problem is always that, getting those folks to expand what they do, or then, if not, relinquish a little bit of the hold they have on the time of their students, so that they can then explore into other avenues to have a more holistic sort of introduction, let's just say, to various musics. That's where it gets complicated. And I don't think any institution has yet to figure it out completely, and some are taking it head on and dealing with the fallout of that, and some decided we're just going to stay where we are. But we're all in the process here in trying to make that small change. But it's
yeah. We talked about it a little bit at dinner, where we asked maybe we accidentally got on a soapbox when we talk about music history taught in music and conservatories. This is really just Western music history, and music theory taught in conservatories is really just Western music theory, and not even just Western music theory, a very specific music theory from a very specific time. It's not expansive at all. And so I think that kind of gets to your point of how do we expand and think about things differently when it's so rooted. It's so rooted, and everything that we do, you'd have to flip a table and be like, all right, new, and completely redo something. So I don't know. You mentioned at dinner that you've gotten, not in trouble per se necessarily, but you've gotten some looks when you've brought certain things up. Is there anything you do in your own horn studio to try to combat and to expose your students to a more holistic view of theory, of history, just because you do have that background? And I think your students are so lucky to have you. I was fortunate to have a professor who understood and wanted me to be a double major, encouraged me to be a double major. So do you do stuff in your own studio to try to encourage this?
Absolutely. It's some of it is really simple to do, and mainly it's because with music, especially when you have intellectually curious people, all you have to do sometimes is just introduce them to something and say, "This is a possibility for you," and if you like it, here's a couple of ways where you can explore more. And sometimes that's all you have to do. And so, for my studio class, every year we do the blues. And to me, every person that calls themselves a musician from America should at least be introduced to the blues. I'm not saying you have to be a blues musician, but you should be introduced to it, know how it functions. It's our music. It was created on this soil. It is our contribution to the world. To call yourself a musician and be American and not know what a blues scale is or how it functions or the chord structure, to me, I don't know the explanation for that. So that's one. So we do, every last one of my students learns blues. The other thing is playing without music in front of you. Some sort of improvisation. We do a thing I call play something for me. And the premise is that for most of us, our parents and our grandparents know zero about Shostakovich. My mom couldn't tell you anything about Shostakovich 5. But she knows she paid a lot of money for me to go to school and learn how to play music. So she doesn't want to say, when she said, hey, honey, at Christmas, hey, honey, could you play something for the family? She doesn't want me to say, well, wait a second, let me go get some music. No, you're a musician. Get your instrument and play something for me. You shouldn't have to look at a score. You're a musician. This is a modern thing, putting it on paper. Put it on paper. It doesn't have to be on paper, And the other thing is improvisation, in that improvising doesn't mean you are learning jazz. And I've had this, the moment that word comes up, a lot of people get uncomfortable. I'm not saying you have to learn how to play jazz. Free yourself from the written page and play from your mind, from your heart, from your soul. Learn the tools that that everyone can adapt to release the fear of just playing whatever comes to your mind. And so we do also improvisation. We do a thing called play something where you have to learn different genres of music. I'll pick different parts of the world, the different types of music, and everything. You have to memorize it, and then you have to play it in your own style with improvisation. So this year it's this semester it's classic American. Not classic American, but non-secular. Oh, am I saying this? Yeah. Non-religious holiday tunes. So no, We Three Kings, but White Christmas, like learn the tune by memory, but then I need a little bit of improv in the middle, so that if you go, Christmas and da 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 da, you can play that for your family, It's a simple thing, but it just opens up so much, so that you're not just playing the Mozart concerto exposition for your grandma. Grandma, she'll still go like this, but she wants you to play her something she can recognize,
Yeah.
We know here in Canton, people love what they know.
Yeah.
That is, and it's something we, of course, struggle with because we are constantly discovering new music that we didn't know before, and we think it's great, and we want everyone to think it's great. But at the end of the day, we always have to remember people love what they know.
But
I'll tell you, just real quick, one of the things that really got me doing this, my very first semester here, during one class, one of my kids had a birthday. And at the last minute, I showed up to class. That person hadn't showed up yet. And I said, hey, y'all, everybody, when so-and-so gets here, we're all going to play Happy Birthday to You in F. And you should have heard the weird notes that came out. Like, no one knew how to play Happy Birthday on their instrument. What is happening? These are people who can play like Mozart Fourth Horn Concerto and can't play da 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 da. Every key, every wrong B flat and C. I said, this is not. Come on.
What is it?
Oh, gosh.
What of the poor kid whose birthday it was?
What is happening to me right now? What is going on? Oh, my God.
I just realized we don't teach that. We don't teach just playing out paper. If the music was in front of them, they could have done it.
I for me, as someone who grew up in the bluegrass tradition, I grew up on improv. So I was introduced to the bassoon at a bluegrass festival, which is a very weird way to meet the bassoon. But improv has always been kind of a part of me. And I think that's something that I think would make traditional classical musicians just so much more in tune with what they're doing if improv was a bigger part of their life. So I really appreciate that teaching method that you've got going on with them. I think that's really, really great. So,
and Jeff, I can't remember if I told you, I grew up as a saxophone player. So improv was, I was improvising a year after I learned how to play the instrument. A year after I learned where to put my fingers on the keys, I was improvising. And I played jazz all through my senior year of college and loved it and had many, many incredible experiences with it. So it's always been a part of what I've done.
Yeah.
And it really should be a part of. It should be a part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
And not jazz. I mean, improvisation can then open up the idea maybe you might want to get into jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to just play free to the page is just.
To this improv point, I had a student the other day in her lesson struggling with, it was a technique thing, struggling with an excerpt that she was trying to get for band audition. You know, she wants to make the highest level band, and she was struggling. It's just A flat major, which on the bassoon is a little weird on the fingers. Like it's noodly. There's a lot of noodly things on that, but she was struggling so hard, and I was like, okay, we need to figure this out. And so we talked for a long time. She's also a singer, and so I said, do you struggle when you're having to sight sing something? And she said, no, I never have any problems when I'm sight singing. I know she knows rhythms immediately, but if she's doing it on bassoon, she's really struggling. And so I said, okay, you know this scale. I took the music away from her and I said, it starts here, ends here, do that, do the passage. And she then played it almost perfectly when she wasn't looking at the music. And it was really, really interesting to learn in that moment. I'm like, oh, you are so aural in the way that you do things. You're not a visual person. Like singing is such a thing we need to get bassoon to be more like singing for you. And so we took the music away and she just played what she remembered, and it went so much better than it ever had before. And I was like, okay, interesting. Okay, so we need to do a lot more without the music in front of us. So we've started doing that in her lessons more, and it's been so beneficial to her. And I think it's something free. Your brain can just look at stuff and then get tripped up and just get things mixed up, and then you get confuddled. There's articulations and all. Yeah, everything's there on a page. I'm trying to look at it and also play. And if you can just get rid of that, it was really, really cool to watch. So yeah.
What?
But with our last couple of points here today, I just wanted to, you've done so much in your career so far, and I'm sure you're going to do even more amazing things. But when looking back, fingers crossed, looking back and kind of looking forward at what you want to do with your life, I mean, there's so much career left to do. What are you hoping is a legacy that you can leave on this field, on your students? What is something you want to look back and be like, this is the legacy I've left with the work that I've done?
That's a great question. And I don't think, if I listen back to this, 10 years from now, I'll say, oh man, I wish I had said this or that, the other thing, because I've never really sat down and thought about that necessarily. But at the moment, my pursuit has always been to bring people together. And I know that sounds kind of cliche-ish, but music can be a bit elitist. And not only the making of it, the study of it, and in a lot of cases, the hearing of it in certain venues, and trying to find a way to make the common person interested and have them have access. But it's also in composing. My whole idea is to bring my personal urban experience into my music, unapologetically. I studied the Western greats, and my music, and I'm sure Matthew can attest to this, has some firm grounding in classical Western composition, but I can't help that I'm influenced by Brazilian samba and R&B and the blues, and it finds its way into my music, and I think that is how we bring different styles together, and hopefully bring different people together to listen to this music, because they'll hear something that they can relate to. The other thing is, helping institutions diversify their audiences. And so, again, availing yourself to community efforts in that regard.
Question: I asked at the beginning how many other students of color how many peers you had at Manhattan School of Music who are students of color. What is it like at Oberlin now, as far as how many members of the conservatory are students of color here in 2023?
I couldn't give you a percentage. That's something actually that we have access to. I don't know. I would say it's in the 10 percentile, something, give or take 2 to 4, either way. Well, I don't think it's 6%, but I think it's 10 to 14%, something like that, which is kind of the norm in institutions around the country. And it's actually what's to be expected in general from conservatories, because you just, it's, well, I mean, African Americans make up about 14% of the country, so if you're talking pure percentages, it makes sort of mathematical sense. But if you're talking about, how many we attract in terms of, applications, how many we accept, it's probably a lower number, much lower number. And it's mainly because it's so bloody expensive. I mean, it's just, college is expensive, and conservatories are. I mean, we're talking about a career in classical music, and you can't graduate from school owing $400,000 to the government, and play bassoon, viola. It's just, and so parents are opting for other things, other institutions. Um, Oberlin helps out quite a bit. We have a thing called Meet the Need, and so whatever the students can't afford, uh, we cover. But that means that the parents have to like max out. I mean, they literally have to pay every dime that they could afford, and then we come on the other end. And unfortunately, that leaves classical music still amongst the elite. It's just too expensive. It's an expensive uh, way to study.
And it's expensive on the front end before you even get to school, before you even get to paying for applications, because you have to pay for applications. You have to pay for the lessons and flights if they're not from the Northeast Ohio area. It's just the dollars rack up quite fast from a very early age. And then, it's very rare that you get a lucrative career in music. It's not, I think that's one thing that I hope conservatories do a little bit a better job of. And what I appreciate about Oberlin and appreciate about where I went to school at Baldwin Wallace is the exploration of other ways of being in this field that's not just purely playing. Or what does it look like to be a musician, a gigging musician, and do different types of projects. It doesn't have to just look like a full orchestra, and just giving students a little bit more tools in their toolbox. I wish that more schools did that. I still think that it's pretty one-track minded in the way that you go to school, you take auditions, you get an audition, bada boom, bada bang, we're done. Like, that's not how this works. And so I think that that's why to have you as a professor for these students is so exciting, because they get to see all the options. There's options, but also how incredibly lucky someone has to be to land those options. And so how do you put yourself in those positions? How do you network? How do you make these connections? It's more than just being really good at the French horn.
I can't tell you how many times in studio class, where a conversation, I love to talk, as you can tell, where a conversation will then lead into, the different options that come into life, and they have questions for me. And I would sooner have an hour-long conversation about some experience I had and how to prepare for certain opportunities than to hear somebody play, Brahms 4 solo for the 20th time in front of class. They're going to get way more out of, how did you get on Broadway? What was that, or, whatever, how did you start wind quintet? What is that? They get more value out of me from that, and so, it's just important, I think, again, to expose them to as much as possible.
Definitely. So in wrapping up today, we're going to ask you the question that we ask all of our guests at the end of every episode. And this is a very, very open-ended question, so take it as you will. How do we orchestrate change?
Well, I have to admit that, again, it's complicated because change scares people. And some people run to that sort of, that sort of turmoil. Like so you have this crossroad of there are people who don't want to even talk about change, and some people who are wearing it as a badge of honor, like we are about to make some change here. I think, and I know it sounds cliches, but I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to be had. I think calm voices need to have those conversations because for the folks that really, really do have valid and proven experience in how classical music should be taught, presented, it's hard to convince them to change. And then you have some people who are ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that doesn't work either. I don't know a world without Mozart. I want Mozart in my world, but I also want some Price and some Dawson and some Still, I think change comes from everyone finding what's the word I'm looking for? A comfortable way for everyone to tell the true American story. But you can't just do it just because it's an untold story. We can't just throw it down the throats of people like your patrons for just the sake of having them. You must hear this story. It has to make sense. There has to be a reason behind what you do. And so the retelling of the full American story, I think, is literally the way for us to progress in the future. And calm minds and thoughtful people need to have a conversation about how we do that, not only in programming, in pedagogy, in engaging audiences so that you have much more diverse audiences. I think those audiences need to be part of that conversation. And I think young people need to be a part of that conversation. And I think the scariest part is having the young people be a part of the conversation, because those are the true agents of change. They will tell you what they want. And we as these old folks might say, well, that's crazy. We're not going to do that. Well, guess what? Then they're not going to come study at your institution, or they're not going to get into classical music, and they're certainly not going to come to your concerts. Yeah. And so if you want to go out and look out in the audience and everyone else that you're looking at is 85 and above, continue what you're doing. But if you want to orchestrate change, tell the whole story, even some of the uncomfortable parts, but tell it in a meaningful way, a way that that we could all come together and hear it for what it's the value of it, and the beauty of it.
Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. A pleasure talking to you today, and of course, again, a pleasure premiering your piece.
Mm-hmm. It's been so much fun chatting with you. You're a fun person, and I'm glad that you got to be here in Canton.
Well, thank you. You all treated me and my family so kind, and we still talk about the experience from last week. So I know everyone who comes through there gets the same treatment, and so thank you for what you do with Canton. Thank you very much.
Jeff Scott, composer, French horn player, and professor at Oberlin College.
Orchestrating Change is a production of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
Our theme music was composed by Eric Gould and performed by Derek Snyder and Tim Adams.
Our audio engineer and mixer is Nathan Maslick, with video and audio editing by Shoreline Media.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.